Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia and I have a 6 weeks old newborn baby named Lily. My channel talks about less discussed and controversial topics in the realm of motherhood. This video is a follow-up video from my social egg freezing story, which talks mainly about the process of freezing my eggs. I'll link the video below and above. In this video, I will share my personal story on the process of revisiting those frozen eggs, thawing them, and using them. Thanks to the comment from my previous video, I will answer the questions asked. Before I start, I'd like to do a quick summary of my situation. I froze my eggs when I was 34 years old, which was in the year of 2012. I did not use my partner's sperm because he has a condition called azoospermia due to Y autosome translocation. What it means, he has 1 in 100 chances of producing a healthy baby. Even if he produces a healthy baby, the baby will also have the same condition. My partner and I ended up using a donor sperm instead. Using a donor sperm is worth another video by itself. I will not be talking about it in this video, but if you are interested in me sharing the process of getting a donor sperm, feel free to let me know by commenting in the comment section below. I also live in Melbourne, Australia, so some of the process might be similar to where you live. Some of them must be specific to Melbourne, Australia. Let's start with the first question. Were your eggs frozen with the fructification technique? Yes, I had mine frozen at Melbourne IVF using a freezing procedure known as vitrification in Melbourne IVF laboratory. This process involved immersing each egg in a series of special fluid solutions to protect its cellular structure, followed by storage in freezing tanks of liquid nitrogen. Eggs may be stored for many years. How many eggs did you thaw out? And how many eggs survived the thawing process? I had 19 eggs frozen and I thawed out 10. Out of those 10 eggs thawed, 6 eggs survived. So the survival rate is about 60%. What was the fertilization rate? Out of those 6 eggs that survived the thawing, all of them got fertilized and resulted in 3 embryos. Did you do PGS testing? Yes, PGS or pre-implantation genetic screening aims to reduce the time and cost to have a healthy baby by selecting an embryo that has the highest chance of resulting in an ongoing pregnancy. PGS works by screening for the correct number of chromosomes. It is common for embryos to contain an incorrect number of chromosomes, regardless of your personal health and reproductive history. When it happens, the most likely outcome is that the embryo will not implant, which leads to a negative pregnancy test. Or the embryo will implant, but then miscarry. Less commonly, this can lead to the birth of a baby with chromosome conditions such as Down syndrome. The frequency of these chromosomes errors increases with the maternal age. When I read in Melbourne IVF website, approximately 30% of embryos from women aged 30 will have the incorrect number of chromosomes. This proportion increases to 80% when the woman is age 40 due to the aging process that occurs in the egg. At 30 years of age, 1 in 6 pregnancies end in miscarriage. At 40 years, this figure will rise to 1 in 3 pregnancies. Because of that, I believe it's worth taking on a PGS testing. When I did mine in Melbourne IVF, PGS testing cost approximately $700 per embryo, and it's capped to $3,995, almost $4,000 for up to 10 embryos. I'll move on to the next question. How many embryos made it to blast, or did you have a 3 days transfer? Let me walk you through the end-to-end process, which I have a note here from when my fertility doctor walked me through the actual process. The process is called natural thaw cycle. In step 1, we'd like to identify day 1. So day 1 is identified as the first day of full flow period. If my full flow period happens before 3 p.m., that would be my day 1, and I was required to call the Melbourne IVF nurse. If my full flow period happens after 3 p.m., my day 1 would be identified as the next day, and I was also required to call the nurse. If my full flow period happens on Sunday, my day 1 would be identified as the next day, which is on Monday, and I was required to call the nurse as well. And the nurse would prescribe me with some injections, treatment, and I continued to do so. And then on day 10, that's when step 2 happens, when my fertility doctor performed an ultrasound after the treatment. The idea of ultrasound is to detect an ovulation. If there is no follicle seen on a scan, your fertility doctor will advise, which probably prescribe a further treatment. However, if follicles are seen on a scan, then I was required to do a blood and urine testing to detect an ovulation. If an ovulation is detected, my fertility doctor would thaw my eggs. I had 19 eggs frozen. My fertility doctor ended up thawing 10 eggs. And then those eggs would be fertilized with sperm using ICSI method, which in a simplest term, individual embryo would be injected with sperm. And then the embryos would be grown in the lab for 5 days, and transfer of the embryo to my uterus happens on day 5. The transfer was pretty straightforward. I was required to arrive in the clinic or hospital. In my case was in Melbourne IVF Clinic 30 minutes prior to the transfer. I sat on a chair. I could see on a screen when the clinician actually grabbed my embryo, and of course do further identification to make sure these are my eggs and embryos, and then did a transfer into my uterus, and I could see the whole process on a screen. Pretty straightforward. It didn't hurt. Once the embryo transfer happened on day 10, after the transfer happened, I was required to do a blood test to identify HCG. If the HCG test result happens to be negative, which basically means it didn't end up in pregnancy, then we would continue the full cycle again to identify day 1 of the first full day of period, and follow this process again, with the exception of rethawing the eggs, because my eggs already thawed and an embryo is already produced. So in my case, my first embryo transfer resulted in this negative pregnancy. So I immediately waited for my first day of full period again and went through the process. Fortunately, in my second attempt of transferring embryo, the blood test HCG was positive, and it resulted in a pregnancy, which basically how I conceived my baby. Do you still have frozen eggs, or if you thawed out all of your eggs? I had 19 eggs frozen and I thawed out 10 eggs. So I still have 9 eggs frozen and now also 1 embryo. The cost of egg storage is $250 for 6 months or $500 per year. This is with Melbourne IVF. This year I was told I have to pay extra to store my 1 embryo on top of my 9 eggs. Do you have remaining embryos? Yes, I have 1 remaining embryos. So that concludes my story on revisiting my frozen eggs and conceiving my 6 weeks old newborn baby. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.